Get out and stop pretending you understand any of this, janitor." Professor Laurel Kensington pointed directly at the door, her fingers slicing through the air like a weapon. The 37-year-old woman, the mathematics star of Hudson Heights University, had just humiliated Holden Carraway in front of 30 graduate students, treating him like a stain beneath her designer heels. Holden's hands froze on the cleaning cart. 30 pairs of eyes burned into his back as the students giggled, delighted by this unexpected bit of entertainment. Laurel stood beside the chalkboard covered in complex equations, her framed PhDs glittering on the wall behind her like trophies of intellectual superiority. But instead of leaving, Holden stepped closer to the mathematical proof she was presenting. His deep blue eyes swept across the elegant symbols with an intensity that made Laurel's confident smile flicker for a split second. "Professor," Holden said softly, his voice slicing through the silence, "there's an error in your third line." The room erupted with stunned whispers. The air shifted, and Laurel Kensington, who had always believed she could not be wrong, suddenly stood frozen like a statue. What happens when the person you look down on the most sees something you completely missed? If you enjoy dramatic reversals like this one, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. And ask yourself, how will Laurel react when a janitor points out a mistake in her lecture right in the middle of class? Let's find out what happens next. The humiliation echoed through the marble halls of Hudson Heights University like a silent declaration of war. Within hours, the rumor spread like dry fire. The janitor had dared to challenge Professor Laurel Kensington, the rising star of the mathematics department, the pride of the entire university. In Laurel's corner office, where wide glass windows overlooked lawns manicured like a royal garden, students dressed in designer casuals chatted about philosophy and game theory over $12 lattes. The four walls around her displayed degrees from Harvard, MIT, Cambridge, like a shrine honoring intellectual supremacy. Prestigious journal publications lined her shelves. At faculty dinner parties, she raised glasses of wine that cost a month's salary for some people, engaging in academic debates with decorated Nobel laureates. Laurel was the embodiment of the academic elite, and she behaved as if she were entitled to it. On the other side of that world, Holden Carraway began his shift just as the sun dipped below the horizon. His old cleaning cart rolled through silent after-hours hallways, restrooms, classrooms, and laboratories. 3 buildings, 8 hours of work, emptying trash, mopping floors, restocking toilet paper, sanitizing desks and chairs. But during the rare minutes he could rest, Holden opened advanced mathematics books he had carefully hidden among maintenance manuals. His locker held 2 contradictory worlds: cleaning chemicals and notebooks, filled edge to edge with complicated mathematical proofs, stained with coffee drips from studying in a rush during night shifts. The hierarchy on this campus was as clear as a cloudless sky. Students paid $75,000 a year for the privilege of calling themselves Hudson Heights. Professors lived in ivory towers where intellect was measured in grants and research output. And support staff like Holden were nearly invisible. Silent gears keep the academic paradise running, without anyone bothering to look their way. To Laurel, that hierarchy was simply the natural order. Intelligence, she believed, only flourished in prestigious families, expensive schools, and elite social circles. She dated Dr. Clayton Reeves of Columbia as living proof of that belief, a way to reinforce the class she considered herself part of. When she saw maintenance staff enter a classroom, she didn't even bother to look up. In Laurel's eyes, they lacked the capacity for meaningful conversation, let alone any understanding of advanced mathematics. And yet, even as she basked in the perfection of her world, a world built from pride and privilege, the first cracks had already begun to form. She didn't yet know that the man pushing the cleaning cart was about to shatter the entire illusion she had believed in her whole life. Holden Carraway had not always been the man working night shifts behind a cleaning cart. 9 years ago, he had been a promising doctoral student at Columbia University, pursuing mathematical problems that only a very small circle in the world could understand. His professors all said Holden's future was bright, that he would become one of the great mathematicians of his generation. Then he met Sydney Halpern. She was a waitress at the cafe where he often studied until midnight. Sydney had a smile that made him forget equations, and green eyes that convinced him life still had room for miracles. They fell in love fast, intensely, the kind of love that belongs on the pages of youth novels. At 22, all passion and naivete, they didn't protect themselves. When Sydney became pregnant, Holden didn't hesitate. He took a semester off to prepare for fatherhood. They rented a small apartment in Queens and planned a simple wedding after the baby arrived. Hazel Carraway came into the world on a freezing winter night. She was perfect, tiny, with her mother's blue eyes and a spark of cleverness that Holden recognized instantly. He held his daughter in his arms and felt the universe shift around him. 3 months later, their world collapsed. "Congenital heart defect," Dr. Nina Parkhurst said, her voice gentle but unable to hide the severity. "Hazel has a ventricular septal defect. She needs surgery as soon as possible. Estimated cost, $280,000. Insurance covered only part of it. They still had to shoulder more than $120,000 out of pocket. Holden started taking on every job he could find, tutoring math, working library shifts, accepting any task as long as it paid. Sydney worked 2, sometimes 3 shifts a day. But the medical bills arrived faster than they could earn money. Debt piled up like a boulder, crushing their chest. The stress began tearing their relationship apart. Sydney barely slept, haunted by every wheezing breath Hazel made. Holden struggled to juggle research and endless jobs. They argued about money, about the future, about choices neither of them had the strength to make anymore. Then one morning, Holden woke to find a piece of paper on the kitchen table. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. I love Hazel, but I'm not strong enough for this. I wish I could endure it, but I can't. Please don't look for me. Sydney." The closet was empty. The joint bank account was wiped clean, and Holden, 23 years old, not yet graduated, holding a baby with a heart defect, was left alone. The decision came quickly and brutally. Holden couldn't continue his PhD program when his daughter needed him every minute. He couldn't do 80 hours of research a week while Hazel needed surgery. He withdrew from Columbia, set aside his dream of becoming a professor, and took a janitorial job at Hudson Heights University. The night shift, steady pay, and most importantly, excellent health insurance. That was 9 years ago. Now Hazel was 8, a bright, clever girl who loved math just like her father. She had already undergone 2 surgeries, but soon she would need the biggest, riskiest, most expensive one. Estimated cost, $340,000. Every night, after tucking Hazel into bed in their small Bronx apartment, Holden put on his jacket and went to work. He mopped silent hallways, emptied trash in offices still glowing with lamplight, and during tiny pockets of rest, he opened math books. Because no matter how much life had stolen from him, it couldn't steal his passion. Mathematics ran in Holden's veins. It wasn't something he chose, it was something he was. And tonight, when he stepped into Professor Laurel Kensington's lecture hall to do his job, Holden couldn't stop his eyes from drifting to the chalkboard, couldn't help noticing the mistake in the proof, couldn't stop himself from speaking up, because, to Holden, mathematics was always the truth. Even when that truth got him humiliated in front of 30 students. The whispers about the incident in the lecture hall spread across Hudson Heights like wildfire. But what kept Laurel Kensington awake at night wasn't the humiliation. It was the truth. That janitor, the man she had looked down on, had been right. Completely right. She spent 20 minutes checking the equation again, and ultimately had no choice but to accept her own miscalculation. It haunted her. How could a maintenance worker see something a Harvard-trained professor had missed? The Euler competition was approaching, the most prestigious mathematical event of the year. The prize, $50,000, and automatic admission into the PhD program of any participating university. Math departments worldwide treated the competition as a measure of academic prestige and a tool for recruiting prodigies. Laurel was head of the judging committee. For 15 years, her reputation had been built on her ability to recognize true genius, her never-wrong judgment. This year, she anticipated her greatest triumph yet. 12 candidates, all Harvard, MIT, Yale graduate students, the names born from the elite education she trusted absolutely. 3 days after the incident, Laurel stood before a packed auditorium to announce the Euler Challenge registration list. Her voice was full of confidence as she described the rigor of the competition. "This competition represents the pinnacle of mathematical achievement," she declared. $50,000 and automatic PhD admission await those who truly possess intellectual depth. A Harvard graduate student raised his hand. "Professor Kensington, can all university employees participate as well?" Laurel's smile curved upward with condescension. "Technically, yes, but advanced mathematics requires many years of formal training. We don't want anyone embarrassing themselves in public." She glanced across the room, deliberately locating Holden near the back exit, momentarily pausing his cleaning duties to listen. The message could not have been clearer. To demonstrate the minimum difficulty level, Laurel stepped to the chalkboard and wrote an analytic integral. It looked simple, but solving it correctly required high technique. "Anyone who cannot solve this," she said, "probably should not waste our time with the real competition." Students bent over their papers, using a variety of complex methods. Within minutes, most had arrived at the numerical answer. Laurel nodded with approval. "Excellent. This is the baseline mathematical level we expect." She was reaching for the eraser when a soft voice cut through the room, clear enough to interrupt the shared satisfaction. "Professor Kensington, there's a more elegant approach using symmetry." The room fell dead silent. 30 heads turned in unison toward the maintenance worker who had dared interrupt the lecture. Laurel froze, her hand suspended over the eraser. Her practiced smile tightened as she turned to face the challenge to her authority. "Oh, really?" She emphasized each word. "Then enlighten us." Holden stepped forward, wearing his plain uniform, yet his confidence made several graduate students hold their breath. He picked up the chalk. His strokes were sharp, crisp, astonishingly professional. Instead of the long, cumbersome methods the students used, Holden applied a clever substitution based on symmetry in the trigonometric functions. "By noticing this integral has mirror symmetry," he explained, "we can transform it into a much simpler form. Same answer, but half the effort." His method was beautiful, clean, refined, so much so that the graduate students leaned forward instinctively. Even Laurel had to silently admit that his approach was truly impressive. But the moment Holden set the chalk down, scattered applause broke out. Laurel extinguished it with a glare sharp as a blade. The rivalry inside her ignited fiercely. In a moment of arrogance and recklessness, an explosive mix of embarrassment and something she couldn't yet name, Laurel strode to the chalkboard, dragged the chalk hard across the surface, and wrote a complex differential equation taken directly from her own research. "Very well," she said, turning to face the breathless auditorium, her voice echoing. "If you think you have such mathematical talent—" She paused for a beat, then said clearly, "Solve this, and I'll marry you." An awkward ripple of laughter swept across the room. The joke was clearly meant to humiliate, but beneath the mockery was a real challenge, a battle for dominance. Holden looked at the problem for 30 seconds, seconds that felt like an entire lifetime. Then he began to write. What happens when arrogance meets the one opponent truly worthy of it? The differential equation Laurel had written stared back at her from the chalkboard like an accusation. She had written it in a moment of impulse. a humiliating blow she believed Holden Carraway would never be able to touch. This was graduate-level mathematics, the kind she herself had needed weeks to solve during her doctoral research. The auditorium sank into tense silence as Holden approached the board. The chalk in his hand moved with methodical precision, each stroke decisive, unexpectedly confident. Laurel stood watching, waiting anxiously for him to stumble, for some tiny sign that would validate everything she'd always believed, that only the formally trained could understand mathematics of this magnitude. But that moment never came. Holden analyzed the problem step by step, identified the type of equation, chose the correct mathematical tools, and then applied them with the mastery of someone who saw the structure from the inside, not someone who had merely memorized techniques. In just 5 minutes, he presented the complete solution. Laurel felt the blood drain from her face as she checked each step he had written. Every line was correct. Every transformation aligned perfectly with the results from her own research. "Professor Kensington," Holden set the chalk down, his voice gentle as a thin blade. "The solution is complete. Would you like me to verify the boundary conditions as well?" The room erupted in shocked whispers. Students pulled out their phones. They knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. News hit social media instantly. A janitor had just solved a research-level problem in front of the brightest talents from Harvard. Laurel forced her shoulders straight. "A lucky guess," she said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "One problem doesn't prove mathematical maturity. Anyone can memorize a technique without understanding the theory." But her dismissal sounded like hollow metal striking a brick wall. The elegance in Holden's method refuted her instantly. From the back row, Dr. Brielle Marchand of Princeton stood up. She had witnessed many geniuses in her life, and something in Holden's approach felt deeply familiar. "Very impressive," she said, walking toward the front. "Your method was both rigorous and insightful." Laurel's jaw tightened. Having another professor praise Holden felt like a direct threat to the career she had spent years constructing. "Since you're so confident, Mr. Laurel asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Carraway, Holden Carraway." "Mr. Carraway," Laurel announced, each word sharp and cold. "I formally invite you to participate in the Euler Challenge. But when you fail publicly, remember that I tried to spare you the embarrassment." The gauntlet had been thrown. Academic pride versus working-class resolve. The entire mathematics community was holding its breath. The next morning, registration opened. Unlike usual, Laurel personally supervised the preliminary screening round. She had to ensure Holden would be eliminated immediately. 3 problems, each one harder than the last, designed by Laurel herself, problems requiring years of formal training just to approach. 12 candidates filled the conference room. 11 were graduate students from Harvard, MIT, Yale, each carrying a flawless pedigree. The 12th, Holden Carraway, still in his maintenance uniform, looking as out of place as a wrong note in a chamber orchestra. Reed Lawson from Harvard cracked his knuckles smugly. Tessa Alden, Laurel's star student, reviewed her notes one last time. Corbin Ellery from Yale adjusted his designer glasses with reflexive arrogance. "You have 90 minutes, Laurel announced. "Solve all 3. Problem 1. Find the maximum of a constrained function." The graduate students plunged into pages of lengthy calculations. Holden didn't. He visualized the geometry, saw the intersection point of 2 curves, and solved it cleanly with a single stroke. Problem 2. Analyze a special matrix. The others drowned in systems of equations. Holden simply examined the matrix structure, recognized the pattern, and read the answer. Problem 3. A famous historical problem involving an infinite series. The candidates used modern methods. Holden solved it using Euler's classical style, true to the spirit of the competition. "Time," Laurel said, though the sharpness in her voice had vanished. When the solutions were reviewed, one truth made Laurel turn pale. Holden's answers were not only correct, they were more elegant, more refined, more insightful. Dr. Marchand examined his work with growing fascination. Holden's style felt familiar. His reasoning, the flow of his proofs, the tools he selected, all reminded her of someone she once knew. "All candidates pass," Laurel announced reluctantly. "The official competition begins tomorrow." But the real battle had already begun inside Laurel's mind. Her worldview was cracking under the weight of reality. How could someone without formal training demonstrate mastery like this? That night, Laurel sat alone in her office, searching for information on Holden Carraway. No academic records, no research publications, no trace of formal training. The emptiness made her frustration intermingle with a feeling she refused to name: curiosity. Online, the hashtag #JanitorProfessor began to go viral. Math departments everywhere were arguing fiercely. Can true genius appear outside the system? Her boyfriend, Dr. Clayton Reeves of Harvard, called, his voice dripping with dismissive contempt. "Laurel, you can't seriously respect that janitor. It's embarrassing." But Laurel couldn't shake the image of Holden. Steady hand with the chalk, razor-sharp mind, quiet confidence. For the first time in her career, she wondered, did intelligence truly follow the path she had always believed? Now, it was no longer just a matter of academic pride. It reached into Laurel Kensington's reputation, her beliefs, and the very core of her academic identity. How far was she willing to go? To defend everything she thought she knew about genius. The small Bronx apartment was silent, except for the steady breathing of Hazel. Holden sat beside his daughter's bed, the streetlights filtering through the thin curtains and casting pale yellow streaks across the wall. Hazel looked tiny beneath the thick blanket, strands of gold-brown hair falling gently over a pillow whose floral pattern had long faded. In her arms, the old stuffed bear, held tight like a protective charm. "Daddy?" Hazel asked in a sleepy voice, thin as a breath. "Is the competition tomorrow important?" Holden gently brushed her hair. "Very important, sweetheart." "Because it's to fix my heart, right?" Holden's chest tightened. 8 years old. She was only 8, yet she knew far too much about hospital bills, surgeries, and the fact that her father worked 2 shifts a day just to keep her alive. "That's right, honey," he said. "But it's more than that. It's to prove that dreams don't disappear. Sometimes they just fall asleep for a little while." "Like the princess in the forest?" "Exactly like that." Hazel was quiet for a moment before asking, "You're going to win, right?" Holden didn't lie to his daughter. "I will do my very best. That's all any of us can do." When Hazel was fully asleep, Holden returned to the tiny kitchen table. Around him, medical bills were stacked like silent accusations. Dr. Parkhurst had been clear. Hazel needed surgery within 6 months. Her heart was growing, but so was the defect. $340,000. The number repeated in his mind like a death sentence. 50,000 from the Euler Challenge wouldn't be enough. But it was a beginning. More importantly, winning would open a door he thought had closed forever. A PhD scholarship, a researcher's salary, a future where Hazel could finally have what she deserved. His phone buzzed on the table. A text from an unknown number. "Withdraw from the competition. You don't belong there." A concerned friend. This wasn't the first message. All week, anonymous emails had come in, sometimes threatening, sometimes mocking, sometimes pretending to be concerned. All of them wanted him back in his lane. But Holden couldn't. Not when his daughter slept in the next room, her fragile heart fighting each beat to keep her alive. He opened his worn-out notebook, the last one he kept from his days at Columbia. The final pages were still filled with unfinished equations, chalk-like marks he had made 9 years ago, when he'd been on the verge of a breakthrough in quantum field theory. Just a little further. Then Sydney left, and that dream died. Or maybe it only slept. Like the princess in the story Hazel had just mentioned, Holden checked the time. 11:45 p.m. He had to be at work at 6 in the morning. But before that, he had to prepare. Laurel Kensington was not his only adversary. The entire academic system, the ivory towers, the prestigious degrees, the invisible walls, had been built to keep people like him outside. No credentials, no connections, no reputation. Only raw intellect and the desperation of a father trying to keep his daughter alive. But mathematics didn't care about degrees. It cared only about truth. And Holden Carraway, janitor, single father, former doctoral student, knew truth when he saw it. Tomorrow, he would remind the world of that. The main auditorium vibrated with a kind of charged excitement, like electricity running through every row. 800 seats were packed with students, faculty, and curious onlookers who had come solely to witness the story that had swept across campus. A janitor daring to challenge the royalty of academia. Global live stream viewership surpassed 30,000 within minutes as rumors about the undocumented challenger spilled into international mathematics communities. Laurel stood at the podium, immaculate in her tailored suit, radiating the confidence of someone who had always believed she held absolute authority. As department chair and head of the judging panel, this was her territory, her rules. A perfect chance to restore the natural order after the week's unwelcome disruptions. "Welcome to the Euler Challenge," she declared, her voice echoing off polished wooden walls. "Today, we honor pure mathematical excellence. True mathematical maturity comes from years of rigorous training and proper preparation." As her gaze swept across the contestants, it lingered on Holden, longer than politeness allowed. The implication was clearer than any spoken words. You do not belong here. The competition's format was brutal yet elegant. 3 rounds, eliminating contestants step by step, from 12 to 6, 6 to 3, and finally, one crowned champion. Laurel had deliberately designed the rounds to favor formal education, requirements only well-trained PhD candidates could master. The judges were introduced: Harvard, MIT, Princeton. Dr. Marchand offered a polite nod, though her eyes held a trace of concern she couldn't hide. Then came the contestant introductions: Harvard, Yale, MIT, Berkeley. And finally, Holden Carraway, university maintenance staff. The auditorium fell into an awkward silence. A few scattered laughs broke out, small but sharp as needles. Laurel smiled with satisfaction. The contrast was perfect for her intent. Round 1's elimination problem appeared. Prove that the sum of the first n odd numbers is always a perfect square. So simple it was almost insulting. Exactly the bait Laurel wanted, designed so the legitimate candidates could shine effortlessly. Whiteboards filled quickly with symbols, formulas, and formal proofs. Mechanical, textbook, predictable. But Holden was different. He didn't write formulas. He drew. Patterns of squares built from small dots, growing from 1 to 3, then 5, then 7. Each layer of odd numbers forms a larger square. "Look," Holden said into the microphone, his voice strangely calm. "Mathematics isn't just formulas. It's how we see the hidden structure beneath." The entire auditorium leaned toward his board. No one needed a PhD to understand what he was showing. Dr. Marchand leaned forward, almost smiling. "Brilliant," she whispered. "This is mathematical intuition." The live stream exploded. "I understood math for the first time. Pure genius. Why didn't we learn it this way?" Laurel's lips tightened. Control was slipping from her grasp. Results. All contestants advanced to round 2, but the auditorium had clearly shifted toward Holden. A turn Laurel had not anticipated. #JanitorGenius began climbing the trending charts. During the break, social media erupted. Academic debates are split into 2 factions: natural talent versus credentialed power. University trustees arrived to witness the phenomenon now going global. Laurel's ex-boyfriend from Harvard, Dr. Clayton Reeves, even flew in, dismissing it as Laurel's little circus. Major news networks began setting up cameras. Media outlets sensed a deeper cultural story, a clash between the elite and the invisible. Evelyn Ashbourne, billionaire, the program's primary donor, sat in the VIP row, her eyes sharp as a blade. She wasn't just observing, she was evaluating. Meanwhile, Dr. Marchand pulled Laurel aside. "Laurel, your format seems harsh. Are you sure this is an appropriate difficulty level?" "We maintain the highest standards," Laurel replied, her voice so defensive it almost sounded artificial. But Marchand had seen something, and it troubled her. That night, Holden sat in the quiet apartment, Hazel already asleep. In front of him were advanced textbooks he'd borrowed from the library, pages dense with the language of another world. But gradually, connections began to emerge. The advanced concepts reminded him of the simple ideas he had once mastered at Columbia, like realizing that a castle is built from the same bricks as a small house. His phone buzzed. A message from Tessa Alden. "Mr. Carraway, your proof taught me more than 3 years of graduate study. You see connections we completely miss. Good luck tomorrow." Then another from Reed Lawson. "You made all of us see math differently. Not formulas, meaning." But support wasn't the only thing coming. So was backlash. The academic elite mocked him, questioning whether he truly deserved to participate. Clayton Reeves wrote an op-ed that went viral. "This is a spectacle that undermines the standards of higher education." Laurel subtly amplified these sentiments with statements sweet as honey, but exclusionary at their core. The next morning, Holden arrived early. He worked his usual janitorial shift from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. and had only 2 hours to rest before the semifinals. His uniform still smelled of cleaning solution when he stepped into the stage-lit auditorium. Laurel noticed, and she didn't miss her chance. "Perhaps manual labor isn't compatible with serious academic activity," she said loudly enough for the cameras to capture. A cold strike. And worse, it carried a sliver of truth. Holden was fighting a battle his competitors, propped up by privilege and networks, could never understand. The day of the semifinals arrived, and the auditorium hummed with a predictive buzz. 6 contestants took their positions as the problem appeared on the giant screen, a string of technical symbols that, to most ordinary viewers, looked like an alien language. Determine the convergence properties of this infinite series and analyze its behavior. For anyone outside the world of mathematics, the problem was nearly inaccessible. But Holden saw straight through the intimidating terminology and recognized the core question. Does the series stabilize or spiral out of control? While the other contestants mechanically applied memorized formulas, Holden did something entirely different. He used intuition to grasp the essence of the problem, then sketched simple graphs modeling how the series behaved, sometimes approaching a stable value, sometimes growing wildly without end. "Imagine it like a bouncing ball," Holden explained, his voice calm and clear. "Sometimes each bounce gets smaller until it stops. Sometimes the bounces get bigger, more chaotic, and never end. Mathematics tells us which kind this ball is." His explanation made a graduate-level topic suddenly clear to the audience. The hall erupted in applause. Dr. Marchand rose to her feet, clapping openly, her eyes alight as if she had just discovered a gem. "Extraordinary," she said loudly, addressing the panel. "This is understanding at its deepest level. He's not just solving the problem, he's revealing the beauty beneath the complex theory." Even Laurel couldn't deny. This was not luck, not a coincidence. This was genuine intellect operating at the highest level. When the results were announced, the 3 finalists were Tessa Alden, Laurel's star student, Reed Lawson, representing Harvard, Holden Carraway, the janitor. Global viewership peaked at 85,000. Math institutes across the world began to wonder, Are all our old assumptions about intelligence and education beginning to crack? That night, Laurel shut her office door and began assembling the final round problem. She did not choose randomly. She chose the exact problem from her PhD dissertation. A problem she herself had spent 3 years solving, equipped with full resources, advisors, and endless time. If anything could expose the limits of a self-taught mind, of an uncredentialed genius, it was this. Sitting alone in her dark office, Laurel stared out the window at the Hudson River. Manhattan's lights flickered like stars that had fallen to earth. Her reputation, her faith in the proper educational system, the entire identity she had built through her career, all hung by a fragile thread over tomorrow. Part of her wanted Holden to fail, needed him to fail, to restore the old worldview she had believed was unshakable. But a tiny part of her, very tiny, whispered, "What if I've been wrong all along?" Laurel's phone buzzed. A message from Clayton Reeves. "Tomorrow this joke ends. Then we go back to normal. Dinner?" Laurel stared at the screen. Normal. Was that really what she wanted? A world where value was measured by pedigree? Where people like Holden were forever relegated to jobs that never revealed their true intellect? She didn't reply to Clayton. Instead, she opened the file containing the semi-final solutions. Holden's work filled the screen. Subtle reasoning, elegant structure, mathematical lines that looked almost alive with deep intuition. For the first time in many years, Laurel Kensington felt something she thought had long died. Doubt in herself. She leaned back in her chair, gazing at the city through the office glass. Manhattan, glittering, proud, had once symbolized everything she believed in: system, hierarchy, structure, order. But here, in this very place, a man with no degree, no privilege, no institutional backing, was shaking the entire mathematical world. And in the darkness of her office, Laurel admitted a bitter truth. Tomorrow, no matter who wins, her world would never be the same again. The morning of the final arrived with an energy unlike anything before. News crews had set up cameras all over the auditorium. Online viewership had swelled past 120,000 people worldwide, all waiting to witness the ultimate showdown between genius and prejudice. In the front row, Evelyn Ashbourne sat among board members and the press. Representatives from the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN were present, ready to report on what had become a national conversation about class, education, and opportunity. Laurel stepped onto the stage with an almost unnatural confidence, her tailored suit immaculate, her face radiating an air of absolute control. She had spent the entire night crafting what she believed to be the perfect trap. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice booming across the packed auditorium. "Today's final challenge represents the highest standard of mathematical excellence. With the unprecedented international attention this competition has received, I will be applying what I call the Kensington Standard, the most rigorous test of mathematical maturity ever administered." Dr. Marchand shifted uncomfortably in her judge's seat. Something in Laurel's tone told her this was no longer about academic evaluation. It smelled personal. Instead of a single problem, Laurel unveiled a ruthless 3-part challenge designed to crush any hope Holden might have left. Solve a graduate-level problem in 90 minutes. Present the solution before a panel of expert mathematicians. Defend the approach against aggressive questioning from specialists. This format will distinguish true mathematical maturity from well-intentioned guesswork, Laurel concluded, her eyes locking onto Holden, one of the final 3 contestants. The real betrayal appeared when the problem flashed onto the giant screen. Holden's blood froze as he realized what Laurel had done. This wasn't simply a difficult problem. It was the topic of her doctoral dissertation, a problem she herself needed 3 years to solve, backed by unlimited resources and a team of expert advisors. The technical language on the screen looked alien and frightening to most of the audience, but the mathematicians in the room immediately recognized the impossibility of what Laurel had set up. This problem demanded deep knowledge from multiple branches of graduate-level mathematics, knowledge that typically required years of formal study. Tessa and Reed exchanged knowing looks. As graduate students within Laurel's academic orbit, they had encountered variations of the problem in her advanced seminars. They had years of coursework behind them and direct exposure to the methods Laurel had published in her research. Holden, however, he had 90 minutes to solve something Laurel took 3 years to conquer. Dissatisfied murmurs spread across the auditorium as the mathematics community collectively recognized the rigged game unfolding before them. The live stream chat exploded with outrage, viewers worldwide realizing they were witnessing academic sabotage in real time. Dr. Marchand shot to her feet, her face red with anger. Laurel, a problem of this complexity is entirely inappropriate for a public mathematics competition. Excellence requires the highest standards, Laurel replied coldly, her voice slicing through the suddenly hushed auditorium. We cannot lower expectations simply because some contestants lack proper preparation. Her eyes locked onto Holden again as she delivered the final psychological blow. You have 90 minutes to prove you belong in serious mathematics. Anyone unable to demonstrate true mathematical sophistication should consider withdrawing with dignity, rather than prolonging this painful display. The countdown clock began its merciless descent. Holden stared at the impossible problem, fully aware that Laurel had pushed the competition into territory where his self-taught background simply couldn't keep up. The first 30 minutes were pure agony. While his competitors had already filled their boards with layers of equations and refined symbols, Holden was still struggling to find a single foothold, a way to even enter the maze Laurel had constructed. The mathematics at this level required layers of knowledge he had simply never been formally taught. His whiteboard remained nearly empty. Only a few tentative beginnings crossed out, each one a half-formed attempt leading straight into a dead end. Laurel provided a steady stream of commentary for the live stream audience, her voice dripping with the satisfaction of being vindicated. We are witnessing the fundamental difference between formal mathematical education and well-meaning enthusiasm. Advanced problems like this require a systematic knowledge base built over many years of serious study. At the 45-minute mark, cameras zoomed in on Holden's face. Desperation had set in. He started down multiple approaches, erased them, then tried again. Each failure didn't only smear the whiteboard, it deepened the realization for everyone watching that he was fighting almost entirely blind. Meanwhile, Tessa and Reed progressed steadily along the solution path Laurel expected. Their formal training provided a detailed map through the theoretical wilderness that Holden was stumbling through in the dark. Comments poured rapidly into the live stream chat. He's completely lost. This is painful to watch. Kensington was right. Proper training matters. The janitor finally hit his limit. Academic Twitter erupted with vindicated reactions from Kensington supporters. The narrative swiftly shifted from outsider shaking the system to amateur exposed by real academic rigor. Everything Laurel had predicted appeared to be unfolding perfectly before hundreds of thousands of witnesses. At the 60-minute mark, disaster struck. Holden made a critical error in his third attempt. He applied a theorem incorrectly, one he had only ever half understood from hurried readings. The mistake spread like a virus through his argument, collapsing the entire structure he had tried to build. Holden stood frozen, chalk trembling in his hand, staring at the mocking lines of equations revealing the gaps he couldn't hide. For the first time since this saga began, Holden Carraway looked like a man truly broken. Laurel's voice cut through the quiet, sharp as a blade honed for maximum damage. Perhaps we should allow struggling contestants to withdraw with dignity, rather than prolong this painful display. Some challenges simply exceed the limits of non-traditional preparation. The suggestion fell with the weight of a hammer blow. Cameras zoomed in on Holden's face, capturing the exact moment his once steady confidence fractured into doubt and shame. That image would be replayed millions of times, the moment a supposed genius collided with an unbreakable wall called institutional knowledge. At the 75-minute mark, Holden set the chalk down and closed his eyes. The entire auditorium held its breath. He looked like a man ready to accept defeat in silence, acknowledging that raw talent had finally met a boundary it could not cross. A victorious smile crept across Laurel's face. She believed she had finally proven the truth she had clung to for years, that formal education and proper training were the only paths to true excellence. Just then, Dr. Marchand shot up from the judge's seat, unable to stay silent for even one more second. "Before we continue," Marchand said, her voice rising with an authority that made the entire auditorium hold its breath. "Let us remember this. The greatest discoveries in the history of mathematics came from those who dared to walk paths the world had never imagined." Her words cut through the fog of doubt surrounding Holden. A memory resurfaced, an old seminar with Marchand back at Columbia. A classical method, considered outdated by the modern world, yet powerful in its simplicity. Holden opened his eyes. A spark flickered in his mind. 15 minutes left. Not enough for the ordinary, but enough for the unexpected. Holden wiped the board clean and started over. He did not go down the deep technical route that Laurel wanted. He returned to the classical foundations of mathematical analysis, something many had dismissed long ago. A Harvard professor whispered, "What on earth is he doing?" But slowly, a path emerged on the whiteboard. Not modern machinery, not high-end theory, but variational methods, minimizing energy, the way water naturally seeks a downhill path. 10 minutes left. Holden assembled each piece, guided by instincts honed from years of self-study. Marchand suddenly stood again, eyes shining. She recognized what she was seeing. This style? It came from a classical genius she had studied for years. Time expired. Holden stepped back. His solution was complete, so elegant that Laurel went silent. The presentations began. Tessa and Reed spoke cleanly, correctly, in the precise academic style Laurel had trained them in. Everything was proper, but nothing remarkable. Then it was Holden's turn. He stepped to the board, his voice calm and resonant. "The more complex a problem is, the more it must be viewed with simplicity. I approached it by asking the most basic question: which configuration minimizes the energy? From there, I used classical variational methods." He didn't finish. Laurel leaped to her feet, her voice sharp as a blade slicing the air. "Mr. Carraway, this problem requires nonlinear operator theory. Classical variational methods cannot handle the domain's lack of compactness. Do you even understand Sobolev embedding?" She turned to the judges, radiating authority. "This is precisely why serious mathematics requires formal training. You cannot use 18th-century tools to solve a 21st-century problem." The room murmured. A few professors nodded, swayed by her derision. Holden didn't flinch. He turned to the board and added one more line. "Professor Kensington, I handled the compactness issue using the Poincaré inequality combined with the direct energy estimate. Please look at lines 7 through 12. He pointed to the board, still steady. "As for Sobolev embedding, I don't need it. I work directly with the energy functional rather than detouring through abstract function spaces. The path is different, but the mathematics remains rigorous." Laurel's face flushed. Her voice trembled, though she tried to maintain the upper hand. "You ignored regularity theory. How can you prove the solution is smooth enough to satisfy the boundary conditions?" Clayton Reeves, her boyfriend, stood abruptly in the VIP row, cutting in. "Exactly. This is a serious gap. Laurel, you should demand—" Dr. Marchand's voice cracked across the room, icy and immediate. "Dr. Reeves, sit down. This is a competition for the contestants, not a stage for outsiders." Silence froze the auditorium. She turned to Laurel. stern. "Catherine, allow Mr. Carraway to finish. If there is a gap, we will see it when we verify." Then she faced Holden again. "Mr. Carraway, please explain the regularity issue." Holden nodded and continued writing. "I don't need the level of regularity the professor demands because this energy minimization problem is convex. You can see that in line 4. He pointed to the Hessian matrix. "With convexity, a weak solution automatically becomes a classical solution, per Weyl's theorem. I cited it in line 15. Then he turned back to Laurel, meeting her eyes. "Professor Kensington, you assumed this was a highly nonlinear problem. But viewed through minimization, that nonlinearity disappears. That is why classical methods remain effective." In the audience, an MIT professor whispered, "Good Lord, he's right. The problem really is convex." Another nodded. "Kensington used a cannon to shoot a mosquito." Laurel tried one last lifeline. But references? You cannot invent a method without grounding it in existing research. Did you read Evans, Gilbarg, Trudinger?" Holden gave her a small, gentle smile, the first hint of emotion he'd shown. "I read both. And I also read Euler and Lagrange. They solved similar problems using similar principles." He paused, his voice deepening. "Mathematics doesn't care about trends. It cares about truth. And sometimes, the truth is simpler than we think." The room fell silent. A soft scraping of a chair echoed. Tessa Alden, Laurel's own student, stood, her voice shaking. "Professor, I think Mr. Carraway is right. The convex structure really does simplify the problem." Reed Lawson added, "I agree. This is not a gap. It's a deeper perspective." Laurel looked around. Her students, her colleagues, the audience, everyone was leaving her side. Dr. Marchand stepped to the podium. "The judges will need 20 minutes for independent verification." The auditorium descended into breathless silence. 4 professors, Princeton, MIT, Stanford, and Marchand, gathered around 4 auxiliary boards to examine Holden's proof. Every symbol was rewritten, every inference retraced, every step scrutinized as if panning for gold. The live stream surpassed 150,000 viewers. The global mathematics community held its breath. Laurel sat in a corner, her hands clasped so tightly they'd turned white. Clayton moved to approach her, but she shook her head. She didn't want comfort. She needed to face this. Finally, Marchand returned to the microphone. Her expression was solemn. Her eyes were bright. "Ladies and gentlemen," the entire room leaned forward. "Mr. Carraway's solution is complete, rigorous, and," she smiled for the first time in the entire competition, "exceptional. This is one of the most creative and elegant proofs I have seen in my 30 years of doing mathematics." The auditorium erupted. Cheers shook the walls. The live stream exploded. Academic Twitter ignited. Someone shouted, "When's the wedding, Professor Kensington?" The whole hall roared with laughter. Laurel buried her face in her hands, crimson. Holden stepped to the microphone, not proud, not mocking, just dignified. Today reminds us that intelligence can come from anywhere, that simple paths can lead to the deepest truths, and that we should look beyond what our eyes can see. He glanced toward Laurel, not with spite, but with understanding. Mathematics brought us together today. I hope it continues to do so, beyond boundaries and beyond prejudice. And just like that, he didn't only win the competition. He won the intellect. He won against prejudice. He even won the heart of the person who once saw him as the lowest of the low. As the applause was still thundering across the auditorium, Dr. Marchand rose and walked to the main microphone. With just a slight lift of her hand, the noise faded, a reaction only someone with true authority could command. "Before we conclude," Marchand said, her voice calm, yet carrying the weight of something profoundly significant, "I have a disclosure to make." The entire hall dropped into a thick, palpable silence. Laurel lifted her head from her near collapse, her eyes widening, as if sensing that another tidal wave was about to hit. Throughout this competition, I've been haunted by a certain familiarity in the way Mr. Carraway does mathematics, Marchand continued. His approach, his subtle pathways, the elegance of his reasoning, they all reminded me of someone I once supervised. She turned to Holden, her gaze striking him like a confirmation. I've remembered. Holden Carraway was one of my most outstanding PhD candidates at Columbia. The sentence hit the auditorium like lightning, splitting the sky. Several people gasped. Laurel instantly went pale, blood draining from her face. Marchand opened an electronic record and went on, her voice sharp but never cruel. Mr. Carraway completed all doctoral coursework with the highest marks. He passed his qualifying exam, cleared his preliminary dissertation review under my supervision, published 3 papers in top journals, earned the prestigious Sloan Fellowship, and held a GPA of 3.96. A heavy silence fell. Not a silence of doubt, but in shock. Laurel froze. Each sentence was a blade reminding her that she had publicly humiliated someone whose accomplishments outranked her own. Marchand continued, her voice softening, infused with humanity. Mr. Carraway left the program in his final year because his daughter required treatment for a heart condition. He chose to be a father over being an academic. His departure was a tremendous loss to our department. A wave of emotion rippled across the room. Then came the outrage, not directed at Holden, but at the system that allowed a PhD-level mathematician to work as a janitor for 5 years. On the live stream, comments blew up. Oh my God. Unbelievable. This system is truly rotten. Meanwhile, Holden's phone began vibrating non-stop. MIT sent an immediate admission offer with full funding. Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, all followed within minutes. Evelyn Ashbourne, the billionaire and chair of the board, stood up. Her razor-sharp gaze cut across the room. "Mr. Carraway," she said, her voice deep and decisive, the tone of someone accustomed to making monumental decisions. "I will cover all medical expenses for your daughter's heart surgery." But she wasn't finished. "I will also establish the Carraway Fellowship, worth $10 million, to support university staff who are overlooked yet possess academic ambition, just like you." A third wave of applause erupted, not polite applause, but the kind that lifted the entire room to its feet. The camera slowly turned toward Laurel. Her face was blank. Pain, shame, and disbelief braided into one expression. She had once believed she stood at the peak of the academic hierarchy. She had once believed Holden was a reckless outsider. Now she understood. She had fought to destroy someone more gifted than her in every measurable way. And ironically, she had once promised to marry him if he solved the problem. A spiteful joke now turned into a national punchline. The live stream burst into flames. "Ma'am, time to keep your promise. That plot twist hits hard. So, are y'all getting married or what?" Laurel felt the ground drop out beneath her feet. Amid the uproar, people forgot something crucial. Laurel still hadn't spoken a word. Everyone turned toward her, the once proud professor, the woman who had weaponized her authority to humiliate Holden, the architect of a competition engineered to break him. Now she had to face the truth. She hadn't just misjudged a man. She had gone up against a genius far beyond even her own expectations. The auditorium, the live stream, the international mathematical community, all waited for the final question. What would Laurel Kensington say to the man she once sought to tear down? An apology? An explanation? Or something entirely different? The conclusion of their intellectual and emotional collision was only just beginning. Hours later, the once noisy auditorium now held only 2 people. Laurel sat silently in the front row, her eyes fixed on the whiteboards where her entire worldview had been dismantled piece by piece. The lines of the proof were still there, calm, exact, and shining in a way her own blinding pride had prevented her from seeing. In the vast, cathedral-quiet space, Holden approached. He was still wearing his janitor uniform, even though his phone hadn't stopped buzzing with prestigious offers from MIT, Harvard, Princeton, Stanford. "Laurel," he said softly, calling her by name for the first time. Laurel lifted her head. Her eyes were wet. "I owe you more than an apology," she said, her voice trembling. "I owe you recognition. I owe you the right perspective of who you truly are. And I have to admit who I became in the process of trying to tear you down." Her voice tightened. "I let prejudice blind me to the truth. I am ashamed of every insult and every action I took against you." Holden sat beside her. No anger, no bitterness, only the calm of someone who had endured too much loss to cling to old wounds. "Laurel," he said, "many people judge by appearances, but not everyone has the courage to look back at themselves." A deep silence, not tense, but opening. "As for my ridiculous proposal," Laurel whispered, her face burning with embarrassment. Holden smiled, a real smile, the first he'd ever given her. "So, are you retracting the offer?" Laurel looked straight at him, for the first time without a trace of arrogance in her eyes. "If you're willing to get to know the real me, not the prejudiced professor, but the woman who just learned a very hard lesson, I'd like to invite you to dinner, as equals." "I'd like that," Holden replied. "I think we both still have a lot to learn about each other." In that quiet moment, they both felt something shift. Not lightning bolt love, not a fairy tale, but a beginning, built on respect, intellect, and genuine equality. 6 months passed. The university buzzed with headlines. Dr. Holden Carraway returns to Columbia to complete PhD as visiting scholar. Professor Kensington establishes Carraway Fellowship for overlooked talent. Hazel Carraway's heart surgery successful. The campus lit up whenever Holden and Laurel walked together, not as janitor and professor, but as colleagues, friends, and perhaps, in time, something more. Their relationship blossomed naturally, gently. Not a sugary romance, but a connection forged through intellect, challenge, and mutual respect. They debated, they learned, they supported one another, and they grew. But their story did something far bigger. It ignited a movement. Across social media, people began sharing stories of hidden talent behind ordinary uniforms. A cook who had once been an engineer, an Uber driver with a law degree, a security guard who used to be a novelist. The country began asking, how many brilliant minds are we wasting? One morning, Dr. Nina Parkhurst, Hazel's cardiologist, called. The surgery was a success. Her heart has recovered beautifully. She can live a completely normal life. Holden froze for a second before tears filled his eyes. When he lifted Hazel into his arms, both father and daughter cried, not from fear anymore, but from relief and pure hope. "Daddy won, right?" Hazel asked, her voice tiny but happy. Holden squeezed her gently. "Not just me, us. All of us won." Laurel stood in the doorway, watching quietly, her heart tightening with a different kind of emotion. For the first time in years, she understood. Prestige does not define worth. The human heart does. Intelligence doesn't wear a uniform. Talent doesn't need lineage. And love never obeys society's hierarchy. Ask yourself, today, how many extraordinary people did you overlook because of the job they do? Do you truly look at the people who make your coffee, who clean your buildings, who stand in the background of your life? Do you hear their stories? Because maybe the person you least expect is the person you most need to know. If this story made you think, share it. If it restored your faith in people, leave a comment. And if you've ever been underestimated, tell us your story. If you enjoy stories like this, Stories that remind us that extraordinary things often hide in the most ordinary places. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We have many more journeys to share, stories of kindness, intelligence, and the comebacks that warm the heart. See you in the next video of True Tale Time.